The Hargrove estate sat like a fallen king above the Connecticut hills. 22 rooms of marble and silence, its grand windows reflecting nothing but sky and the hollow judgment of clouds. Inside, on the second floor, in a room that smelled of antiseptic and expensive linen, lay Ethan Hargrove, 33 years old, billionaire, CEO of Hargrove Technologies, a company that had, 2 years ago, changed how satellites communicated across the entire southern hemisphere. He had been on the cover of Forbes at 29. He had shaken hands with heads of state and been quoted in economics textbooks still used in universities. He had been, in every measurable way, a man built from ambition and brilliance. He could not move. He could not speak. And on most days, the doctors weren't entirely certain he could hear. The diagnosis had come 18 months ago, a catastrophic stroke triggered by a previously undetected arteriovenous malformation deep in the brain stem. He had been in the middle of a quarterly earnings call, his voice crisp and commanding as always, when the words stopped mid-sentence. Not stumbled. Stopped. Like a wire cut clean. His assistant, Maya, had watched his face change, not in pain, exactly, but in a kind of terrible clarity, as if he understood in one flash of consciousness exactly what was being taken from him. The paramedics had arrived in 4 minutes. The helicopter to Yale New Haven in 12. The surgery had lasted 9 hours. And when it was over, the neurosurgeon had walked into the waiting room where Ethan's younger sister, Caroline, sat gripping her coffee cup like a lifeline and said the words that reshaped everything. He's alive. But the damage to the brain stem is extensive. We're looking at locked-in syndrome. He may never recover voluntary movement or speech. He may be cognitively intact, we believe he is, but trapped inside a body that will no longer respond. Locked in. It was the cruelest possible combination of words. Not absent. Present. Awake and fully aware behind eyes that could blink, a mind that still fired and calculated and remembered and grieved, but imprisoned in flesh that refused every command. Ethan could hear the nurses debating lunch options. He could smell the lavender his sister brought every Tuesday in a small ceramic jar she placed on the windowsill. He could feel the cold metal of a stethoscope and the warmth of sunlight through glass. He experienced everything. He could change nothing. He had built an empire with his hands. Now those same hands lay at his sides like beautiful, useless sculptures. Specialists from Boston, Chicago, and London had rotated through the estate's converted medical suite. Physical therapists came twice a week. A neurologist flew in monthly from Johns Hopkins. Experimental eye-tracking software had been installed at great expense, a screen mounted near his bed that was supposed to let him spell out words by moving his gaze across a keyboard. But Ethan's eye movements, while present, were inconsistent. Some mornings the machine worked. Most mornings it mocked them both with its patient, blinking cursor. Caroline had hired and fired 4 nurses. Then she had placed a different kind of advertisement, not for a medical professional, but for a live-in household assistant to help manage the estate's daily operations, someone who could also serve as a compassionate, calm presence in her brother's world. The pay was generous. The requirements were empathy, reliability, and the ability to read silence. That was how Sophia Reyes had come to the Hargrove estate on a Tuesday morning in late October, her 2-year-old daughter, Lily, balanced on her hip, a worn canvas bag over her shoulder, and a quiet steadiness in her dark eyes that suggested she had carried difficult things before and had not broken under them. Sophia was 28. She had been born in San Antonio, raised between her grandmother's kitchen and her mother's hospital night shifts. She had studied education for 2 years at a community college before life rearranged itself. Marriage too young, a daughter too soon, a divorce that left her alone but not, She always insisted, defeated. She had cleaned homes, managed schedules, organized households across Connecticut for 3 years. She was good at her work because she genuinely cared about the people whose lives she moved through. That was not something you could fake for long in a house where grief had become the permanent weather. Caroline had almost turned her away at the door. Not because of Sophia, she was clearly capable and warm, but because of Lily. "This is a medical environment," Caroline had said carefully. "My brother requires absolute calm." A toddler, she paused, searching for the diplomatic word. Sophia had nodded. "I understand completely. Lily is well-behaved. She's quiet, actually, unusually so. But if it's a problem, I understand." She had gathered her bag with a dignity that stopped Caroline mid-thought. Something, instinct, exhaustion, the faint possibility of grace, made Caroline say, "Stay. Let's try for a week." That week had been 3 months ago, and nothing in the Hargrove estate had been the same since. Sophia understood houses that held grief the way some people understand weather. Not from a textbook, but from her skin. She had grown up in the aftermath of her father's accident, the year she was 9, when a construction site injury had left him partially paralyzed for 2 years before a slow, grinding recovery. She knew the particular hush of a home where one person's pain had become the entire household's atmosphere. She knew how to move through that hush without amplifying it. From her first week at the Hargrove estate, she established a rhythm. She arrived at 7 in the morning, Lily bundled in her coat, and carrying the small stuffed rabbit she called Bun Bun. They would settle Lily in the kitchen with Caroline's housekeeper, Mrs. Dunbar, who had taken an immediate and ferocious liking to the child and her rabbit. Sophia would then go upstairs to begin her work, the careful coordination of the estate's daily operations, managing deliveries, liaising with the medical staff, handling correspondence that had accumulated since Caroline, who ran a landscape architecture firm in New Haven, couldn't be present full-time. Sophia was not Ethan's nurse. She was not his therapist. But she spent time in his room. She had asked Caroline, in her second week, if she might read to him. The other assistant left audiobooks running, Caroline had said. He didn't seem to respond. Sophia had nodded. "That's different. I'll read. Not at him. With him." Caroline had given her a look she couldn't entirely interpret and then said quietly, "Okay." So Sophia read. Every afternoon, between 2 and 3, while Lily napped downstairs, Sophia sat in the chair beside Ethan's bed with whatever book she had brought that day, sometimes Steinbeck, sometimes Hemingway, once a history of the Apollo program that she suspected he might find interesting given his background in satellite technology, and she read aloud in a clear, unhurried voice. She did not perform the reading. She simply offered it, as if the words were something to share, not something to fill silence with. She talked to him the way people speak to someone they know is listening, not someone they hope might be. She said things like, "Lily discovered that puddles are the greatest invention in human history today, so we had to change her pants twice," and watched for any flicker in his expression. Sometimes she thought she caught something, a tension at the corner of his eye, a barely perceptible shift in his breathing, but she couldn't be certain. She never performed hope for him. She simply kept showing up and treating him as though his presence in the conversation mattered. The medical staff noted with quiet surprise that Ethan's vital signs were more stable on the afternoons when Sophia was present. His heart rate, which sometimes spiked in a pattern the neurologist believed might indicate distress, was measurably calmer. Dr. Nadia Osei, the Johns Hopkins neurologist who visited monthly, had reviewed the data with an expression of careful interest. "It's not conclusive," she told Caroline, "but it's not nothing either." Caroline watched Sophia with the complicated attention of someone trying to decide whether to allow herself hope. She had protected herself from it for 18 months. Hope, in her experience, had a way of making the ordinary cruelties of her brother's condition more unbearable. And yet she found herself listening from the hallway some afternoons, hearing Sophia's voice moving through the pages of a book and feeling something loosen slightly in her chest. There was a morning in mid-November when Sophia was changing the fresh flowers on the windowsill, yellow chrysanthemums, because she'd read they were among the more vivid colors for peripheral vision, and she said, without looking at him, "I know you're in there, Ethan. I don't know what that's like, and I won't pretend to. But I want you to know that this room feels different when you're paying attention. And you're paying attention. I can feel it." She turned then and looked at him directly. His eyes were open, focused on her face, not wandering as they sometimes did. Focused. She said, "Good morning," and went back to arranging the flowers. She told no one about that moment. She held it quietly, the way you hold something fragile that you're not sure you're allowed to name yet. Meanwhile, downstairs, Lily was conducting her own quiet investigation of the Hargrove estate. She had, with the systematic thoroughness of a 2-year-old scientist, cataloged every rug by how they felt on bare feet. She had made firm diplomatic relations with Mrs. Dunbar over the matter of afternoon crackers. She had discovered that the large golden retriever in the portrait above the library fireplace looked like Bun Bun, but bigger, and had reported this finding to her mother with great satisfaction. She had not yet been to the second floor. Caroline had asked that she be kept downstairs, gently, and Sophia had agreed. Lily had not yet entered Ethan's world. That was about to change. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in early December, when the Connecticut sky had turned the color of pewter and the first real snow of the season was falling in slow, deliberate silence outside the estate's tall windows. It was the kind of afternoon that made a house feel both larger and more intimate. Sounds traveled strangely, the cold pressed against the glass, and there was a quality to the light that made everything feel suspended in its own moment. Mrs. Dunbar had left early for a dentist appointment. The physical therapist had finished his session and gone. Sophia was on the second floor landing reviewing a stack of invoices when her phone rang, a call from the medical supply company about a delayed shipment, and she turned her attention to the call for what she estimated later was approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes was enough. Lily, who had woken from her nap 20 minutes ahead of schedule and found the kitchen empty of the usual adults, had conducted a brief, efficient investigation of the ground floor and determined that her mother's voice was coming from upstairs. She had climbed the stairs. She could manage stairs now with impressive confidence, one hand trailing the banister, and moved down the hallway toward the sound of Sophia's voice on the phone. She passed her mother without being seen. Sophia had stepped into the alcove near the window, phone pressed to her ear, frowning at an invoice. Lily continued down the hall. She was drawn, she seemed to decide, to the room at the end, whose door was slightly ajar. A thin bar of warm light fell across the hallway floor from within. Lily pushed the door open. She stood in the doorway of Ethan Hargrove's room, clutching Bun Bun against her chest, and looked at the man in the bed the way 2-year-olds look at most things, with the pure, unguarded interest of someone to whom the world has not yet taught suspicion. Ethan's eyes were open. They were almost always open in the afternoons. They were turned toward the window, toward the snow. The room was quiet. The machines that monitored his vital signs gave their steady, patient readouts. The chrysanthemums Sophia had brought were still bright on the windowsill. Lily walked into the room. She walked directly to the side of Ethan's bed, the way small children approach things they find interesting, without any of the hesitation adults overlay onto new situations. She stopped beside him, looked up at his face for a long moment, and then placed her free hand flat on the white blanket near his hand. She could see his hand there. She studied it. Then she looked at his face again. "Hi," she said. It was not a loud word. It was the ordinary, completely honest greeting of a child who had no reason to expect it would not be returned. The monitoring equipment registered the change before anyone in the room could process it. Ethan's heart rate, which had been at its resting average of 58 beats per minute, jumped to 72. The oxygen saturation sensor flickered. And then, slowly, in a movement so small and so enormous that it seemed to reorder the physics of the room, Ethan Hargrove's right hand turned, rotated at the wrist. Not a spasm, not the involuntary tremors that sometimes moved through his limbs. A deliberate, controlled rotation. His palm opened, facing upward. Lily looked at the open palm. She put her small hand into it. She patted his hand twice, the way she patted things she liked: her rabbit, the golden retriever at the park, the smooth stone she kept in her coat pocket. Then she held still, her hand resting in his, and said, with perfect 2-year-old seriousness, "It okay." Sophia appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, her face arranged in the expression of a mother about to deliver a gentle but firm correction for wandering off, and then she stopped. She stood completely still.
She did not speak.
She watched her daughter standing beside the bed of a man who hadn't moved his hand in 18 months, their fingers laced together in the afternoon light, the snow falling outside the window. She would later try to describe what she saw in Ethan's face in those moments, and find that language was not quite adequate to the task. It was not dramatic. There were no tears running down his face, no great expression of anguish or relief. It was something smaller and more profound than that. His face had simply changed. The quality of stillness in it was different, not the locked, frozen stillness of before, but something that held the quality of presence, of a man who had been very far away and had just, without moving at all, come back. Lily looked up and saw her mother. "Mama," she said pleasantly. "The man's hand is cold." Then she went back to patting it with her small, methodical warmth. Dr. Nadia Osei arrived at the estate the following morning, summoned by Caroline's call the previous evening. Caroline had described what Sophia had witnessed: the hand movement, the controlled rotation, the deliberate opening of the palm, in precise, careful language, trying to not overstate it, trying to hold the event in plain words and let it mean what it meant and nothing more. Dr. Osei had listened quietly on the other end of the line and then said, "I'll be there at 9. She was there at 8:40. The examination was thorough and took almost 2 hours. Dr. Osei worked with the focused patience of someone who had seen too many situations where hope had been premature to allow her self-enthusiasm, and yet, when she stepped out of Ethan's room and into the hallway where Caroline and Sophia waited, there was something in her expression that neither of them had seen on a doctor's face in 18 months. She said, "The movement was volitional."
"I'm certain of that now."
His responses to stimuli today are different than they were 4 weeks ago. The right hand demonstrates clear, intentional motor control, limited, but present and consistent. She paused. There is also, and I want to be measured here because this needs confirmation, what appears to be some limited movement in the right side of his face. Very subtle. A slight shift in the perioral muscles when I asked him to attempt a smile. She stopped. He tried. I could see him try. Caroline sat down on the hallway bench. She sat down because her legs required it. "What does this mean?" she asked. Her voice was steady in the way that voices sometimes become steady when emotion is too large for expression. "It means the pathway between his intention and his motor function is not completely severed," Dr. Osei said. "It means something is rebuilding or finding new routes. The brain is extraordinarily adaptive. We've always known that, but we've also seen cases where the damage was simply too extensive and the adaptation never came. In his case," she measured her words again, "visibly, and deliberately. In his case, it appears something has changed. I don't know why now. I don't know why yesterday and not 6 months ago. She glanced briefly, almost involuntarily, toward the staircase. But something shifted. Sophia, who had said nothing during this exchange, looked at her hands folded in her lap. She thought about Lily's voice saying, "Hi," into that quiet room as simply as sunlight moves through glass. The weeks that followed were a recalibration of everything the household had come to accept as permanent. Dr. Osei arranged for the most aggressive neurological rehabilitation protocol that Ethan's condition would support: targeted electrical stimulation, intensive physical therapy focused exclusively on the right hand, and a new speech pathology consultation. The speech pathologist, a precise and remarkable woman named Dr. Yoon, came 3 times a week and worked with Ethan on the foundation of something: the attempt to form a consonant against the back of his teeth. It took 11 days to get a sound. It was not a word. It was not even a letter, precisely, more a pressure of breath shaped against his lip that contained, barely, the ghost of a consonant. But Dr. Yoon pressed her hand to her own mouth to collect herself and then wrote quickly in her notes: intentional phonation attempt, bilabial, possible or approximation. She did not tell him it was wonderful. She said, "Again." He tried again. Sophia continued her routines. She did not inflate what was happening, to herself or to anyone else. She kept reading to him in the afternoons. She kept telling him about Lily's small, precise discoveries of the world: the discovery that snow could be caught on a tongue, that it tasted like nothing and everything at once, the diplomatic incident involving Bun Bun and a spatula that Mrs. Dunbar would rather not revisit, the afternoon Lily had sat at the bottom of the stairs and sung, in her tuneless but earnest way, the entirety of Twinkle, Twinkle, 3 times in a row. Ethan's right hand moved when Sophia read. Not always, not dramatically, but with a new and unmistakable intention. Sometimes it was just the curl of a finger. Sometimes a slight pressure of the palm against the sheet. Once, she paused mid-sentence and his hand lifted, about 2 inches off the bed, held for a moment and lowered. She kept reading.
She did not stop to comment on it.
She simply turned the page. In the evenings, after she had taken Lily home to their small apartment in Westville and given her a bath and read her to sleep, Sophia sat at her kitchen table and allowed herself to feel what she had spent the days carefully not feeling: a hope so fragile and so large that it frightened her.
She was not naive.
She knew what locked-in syndrome meant at its most permanent. She knew the doctors were using words like possible and emerging and encouraging with immense and necessary caution. But she also knew what she had seen in Ethan's face on that snowy Thursday afternoon when a 2-year-old had walked into his room and held his hand and told him it was okay. She had seen a man come back from somewhere very far away. She held that knowledge quietly, as she held most things that mattered. January arrived, and with it the kind of cold that seals Connecticut in silence, and 2 things happened that would not be fully understood until much later, when the story of those weeks had been assembled into the shape it would carry forward. The first thing, Ethan spoke. It happened on a morning when Sophia was changing the chrysanthemums for freesias. She had read that the sweet, layered fragrance of freesias was associated with memory and calm, and she was humming quietly, a habit she was barely aware of, an old song her grandmother used to sing in the kitchen in San Antonio. She was not reading. She was not talking. She was simply present in the room with him, doing her work, humming. She heard it as she reached to place the flowers in the vase.
A sound.
Shaped. She turned. Ethan's eyes were on her face. His jaw had moved. She could see the effort in the muscles of his neck, the extraordinary concentration behind his eyes. And then again, the sound, and this time it resolved. Not a phoneme, not an approximation, but a word. One syllable. Rasped and broken and imperfect and unmistakable. Hi. The word Lily had given him. The first word offered without fear, without performance, without the weight of all that had been lost, and so the first one his voice found its way back to. Sophia set down the freesias very carefully. Her hands were shaking. She did not let her face collapse into the emotion that hit her like a wave against a breakwater. She looked at Ethan directly, and she said, in the same even voice she always used with him, "Hi."
His face changed.
The corner of his mouth, the right corner, the side that had been showing minute, barely visible movement for the past 3 weeks, moved. It pulled upward.
Slight.
Unmistakable. A smile that cost him everything he had, and that he gave anyway. Sophia went into the hallway and allowed herself to cry for 45 seconds against the wall. Then she dried her face, went back into the room, and picked up her book. The second thing that happened in January was smaller and larger simultaneously. Lily turned 2.5, reached the age where children become aware that the world has stories in it, and began asking questions about the man upstairs. Why the man can't talk, she asked one evening as Sophia buckled her into her car seat. Sophia considered this.
His brain got hurt, she said.
He's working very hard to get better. It takes a long time. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Then, like when I fell off the slide and my knee hurt and you put the bandage and I was brave? Exactly like that, Sophia said. He's being very brave. Lily nodded, satisfied. Can I bring him Bun Bun? So he's not scared. Sophia paused. She looked at her daughter's face, earnest and utterly without subtext, and thought about all the things adults build around vulnerable people, systems of protection and professional distance and careful language, and how a 2-year-old had simply walked through a door and held a man's hand and told him it was okay and restarted something that 18 months of medical expertise had not been able to reach. She said, "Let's ask Caroline." Caroline said yes, immediately, before Sophia had finished the sentence. So the following Thursday afternoon, their understood time in the room together, Sophia brought Lily upstairs. Lily walked in carrying Bun Bun solemnly in both arms. She went to the chair beside Ethan's bed. She climbed up onto it with great effort and settled herself and placed Bun Bun on the edge of his blanket. "This is Bun Bun," she informed him, with the gravity of a formal introduction. "Bun Bun is soft."
She looked at Ethan.
"You can hold him if you want. When you're scared." A pause. "Are you scared?" Ethan's right hand moved. 3 distinct finger movements, a kind of trembling wave, reaching toward the rabbit. Lily watched this carefully. Then she moved Bun Bun closer, until his worn ear was under Ethan's fingers. Ethan's hand rested on the rabbit. Lily, having completed her mission, sat back in the chair and looked at Sophia. "He's okay now, Mama," she said simply. And then, as if this required no further elaboration, she asked if they could have a snack. Sophia stood in the doorway looking at the man in the bed with his hand resting on a stuffed rabbit worn thin with love, and the afternoon light coming through the window onto the freesias, and she thought that some things that cannot be explained should not be explained, should just be allowed to be true. By late February, Ethan Hargrove could say 7 words reliably. Hi.
Yes. No. Please. More. Wait.
And the one that had emerged on a Thursday afternoon when Lily had asked him his name and looked at him with the patient expectation of someone absolutely certain of receiving an answer. Ethan. He had said his own name, hoarsely, imperfectly, like a man reclaiming a possession he had thought lost, and Lily had nodded approvingly and said, "Good," as if she had been waiting for him to confirm this all along. Dr. Osei had presented his case at a neurological conference in Baltimore in March. She did not, in her presentation, describe the circumstances of the first volitional hand movement, the 2-year-old, the stuffed rabbit, the word hi. She described the neurological data, the pattern of recovery in the right motor cortex, the evidence of new neural pathway development in the brain stem region adjacent to the original site of damage, the timeline and progression of speech recovery. She described it in the careful, peer-reviewed language of her discipline. After the presentation, during the Q&A, a colleague from Stanford raised the question of catalyst. What had changed in the environment 18 months after the initial injury, when progress had been essentially flat? Dr. Osei paused before answering. Then she said, "There was a shift in the emotional environment of the patient's care. A new kind of relational presence that we did not fully anticipate."
She paused again.
I can't quantify it to the standard you'd expect of a published study, but I believe it was meaningful.
She left it at that.
Some truths are too precise and too large for the same sentence. They exist in the space between data and wonder. By spring, Ethan could move his right arm with purpose. He could grip a modified pen and, with extraordinary effort and concentration, produce marks on paper that were not yet letters, but that held the intentional shape of language. His speech had expanded to approximately 30 words, still slow, still broken, still requiring a patience that he seemed to have found somewhere in the long geography of his 18 months of silence. Dr. Yoon believed he would, eventually, recover a significant degree of functional speech. "I won't tell you it will be what it was," she said honestly, "but it will be enough for him to be heard. And he has things to say." The eye-tracking computer had been supplemented by a simple letterboard that Sophia had introduced, holding it up during their afternoon sessions, waiting while his eyes or his slowly recovering right hand indicated letters. One afternoon in April he spelled, haltingly, THANKYOU. Sophia said, "You're welcome," in her ordinary voice and turned the page. He spelled, NOTTHEBOK. She looked up. He was looking at her. That steady, focused look she had come to know. The look she had first noticed in November when she'd told him she knew he was paying attention. His right hand had lifted, was lifting, and rested briefly on the edge of the letterboard. He moved his index finger, imprecise but purposeful, to YOU. Sophia sat with that for a moment. She thought about San Antonio and her grandmother's kitchen and the long years of learning to carry hard things without being bent by them. She thought about the morning Lily was born and how terrifying and total that love had been, how it had rearranged every priority she had ever held. She thought about walking into this estate in October with her worn canvas bag and her daughter on her hip and a quiet steadiness she had not known was unusual because it was simply how she had learned to move through the world. She said, "Lily says you're okay now." The right corner of his mouth moved. The smile, fuller now, more recognizable. A smile she was learning to read the way you learn to read handwriting until it becomes as clear as print, spread slowly across his face. That summer, when Ethan had progressed far enough that the estate's converted medical suite gave way to a proper rehabilitation room, when he had graduated from the letterboard to a tablet with a voice synthesis program, when his sister Caroline had started arriving on Fridays and staying through Sunday without the shadow in her face that had lived there for nearly 2 years. That summer, Lily learned to swim. Sophia took her to the community pool in Westville every Saturday morning, and Lily approached the water with the same method she approached most things: absolute confidence, no theoretical understanding whatsoever, and an expectation that everything would be okay. She was right, generally. On a Saturday afternoon in July, Ethan used his tablet's voice program to compose a message that Caroline read to Sophia in the kitchen while Mrs. Dunbar pretended to be occupied with the kettle. The voice was synthetic, flat, nothing like the commanding baritone he had once possessed. But the words were his, chosen by him, in his order. The message said, "I was in a room with no door for a very long time. A small person walked through the wall and left it open. I would like, if you are willing, to offer you and Lily a permanent position here, not as staff, but as whatever you would like to call two people who opened a door that doctors said was closed. You kept reading when no one was listening." She held my hand when I couldn't hold it myself. "I have not found the right words yet, but I have time now to find them." A 2-year-old had done what medicine could not. She had simply shown up, without fear or pretense, and held space for someone who had forgotten that he still deserved to be held. Sophia read the message twice. Then she looked out the kitchen window at the summer garden, green and improbable in its ordinary abundance. She thought about what she would say. She thought about Lily in the pool that morning, arms windmilling, face laughing, absolutely certain the water would hold her. She said, yes. Just that one word, for a man who was learning that one word at a time was enough to begin again. Somewhere in the estate, faint and growing stronger, the sound of Ethan Hargrove practicing speech with his tablet, shaping imperfect syllables in the quiet of the afternoon while freesias opened on the windowsill and the summer light moved slowly across the floor, the evidence of a life returning to itself. Not the life it had been. Something new. Something built from silence and a child's absolute trust and a woman's patient, unperforming presence. Something that resembled, in the end, the most ordinary and inexplicable miracle of all, a person who was found by love and who found his way home. And